That shift from simply recognizing a word to actually, owning it, that's the holy grail of advanced language acquisition. Today, we're diving into what is arguably the most persistent challenge for C1 learners, moving past functional fluency to building a truly vast and sophisticated lexicon, the kind of vocabulary that allows for real nuance and precision.
It is a critical distinction. Yeah, we're talking about the difference between, say, communicating successfully and being able to appreciate the subtle brushstrokes of a novelist's prose or structuring a complex professional argument. The material really highlights that achieving this kind of depth requires a major strategy shift.
Exactly. And the central question we're examining, based on the material before us, is really this. Does achieving a C1 level vocabulary rely primarily on the slow, organic cultivation of a few deeply understood words, what we're calling the gardener's approach, or is the sheer need for breadth so great that it requires a more intensive, high-volume accumulation strategy?
And my focus is going to be on that necessary breadth. I believe the path to a C1 vocabulary requires the efficiency of systematic, high-volume accumulation running in parallel with any patient tending. We can't afford to move too slowly.
And I maintain that the patient, depth-focused gardener's approach is, in fact, non-negotiable. It is the essential mechanism for moving words from receptive memory, just understanding them, to truly owning them, ensuring they are instantly available for spontaneous, productive output. To start, I think we have to fundamentally shift our focus from, say, construction to cultivation. The goal isn't just to build a stack of words. It is to ensure deep, lasting lexical growth. And this means we absolutely must prioritize quality over quantity. The core strength of the gardener's approach is its manageable, consistent pace. We advocate for aiming for only 3 to 5 new words or complex phrases per day. This consistency is really the antidote to the sporadic, high-burst learning attempts that, they inevitably lead to burnout, and more importantly, forgetfulness. Frantic digging doesn't build deep roots. This whole philosophy, it hinges entirely on the vocabulary journal. And we aren't just talking about a simple notebook list. This is a device for forced mental effort and necessary cognitive bottleneck, if you will. The learner has to capture the word's entire ecosystem, the original source sentence, their own unique sentence demonstrating understanding, key collocations, synonyms, antonyms, pronunciation notes. That level of detail and engagement is exponentially more powerful than just recognizing a word isolated on a flashcard. By immediately forcing yourself to use the word, the watering with usage step, we ensure that those few words transition directly into productive skills. And that right there is the definition of ownership at the C1 level.
Okay, I understand the value of deep processing. I really do. But I have to challenge the premise that slow cultivation, say 3 to 5 words a day, can efficiently lead to the vast vocabulary that C1 mastery requires. That pace, while, psychologically manageable, is, I would argue, mathematically insufficient for an ambitious learner who's trying to achieve critical lexical mass. We have to consider the practical reality of the immersion stage, which the material calls preparing the soil. That heavy input reading academic journals, watching complex media, engaging in professional conversation, it generates a massive number of candidate words. And many of these meet the urgency criteria, meaning the brain is signaling that they are high value and frequently encountered. To manage this incoming volume effectively, learners require systematic accumulation tools right from the get-go. The material itself provides the blueprint for this efficiency by highlighting the value of structural accumulation. Learning word families and roots, prefixes and suffixes. Knowing, for example, the Latin root mal instantly unlocks malcontent, malignant, malformation, and on and on. These analytical, high-volume strategies multiply your vocabulary with each root learned. They should be a core accumulation strategy for breadth, not just some fine-tuning tool you use at the end. And, cases like Lena the architect, who systematically collected and targeted phrases like spatial dynamics, show that functional breadth achieved through focused accumulation is often a prerequisite for professional success. To manage this incoming volume effectively, Learners require systematic accumulation tools right from the get-go. The material itself provides the blueprint for this efficiency by highlighting the value of structural accumulation.
Okay, let's tackle that efficiency argument head on, because it seems to rely on this idea that more input equals faster, better output, which just isn't true when we're discussing productive vocabulary. That 3 to 5 word constraint, I don't see it as restrictive. I see it as a necessary filter.
But for a C1 learner who is reading widely in, say, The Atlantic, or working through legal documents, the sheer volume of urgent words, those you encounter again and again, it easily exceeds 5 a day. So if immersion is providing those critical signals, doesn't relying solely on the slow, meticulous journal process risk massive inefficiency? Why deliberately slow down and discard valuable learning opportunities when the brain is primed for acquisition? Isn't that an act of self-sabotage for someone seeking vastness?
Because if you attempt to process 20 words a day, 19 of them will remain in a semi-passive state. They'll be recognizable when you read them, sure, but they'll be completely unavailable when you are stalled in a meeting trying to find the precise adjective. The goal isn't recognition, the goal is spontaneous availability. The limitation forces the learner to select only the absolute highest value words, the true bottlenecks in their current comprehension, and then it forces the deep cognitive labor required by the journal. That labor, the forced requirement to look up collocations, write a novel sentence, and consider connotation, that is the cognitive friction that transforms ephemeral recognition into permanent, accessible memory. The patient gardener understands that you have to embrace the plateau during this consolidation phase. You have to trust that 5 words locked down permanently are far better than 20 words half learned and forgotten by the end of the week.
I see why you emphasize that locking mechanism, but I think you're creating a false tension between depth and scale, which, for me, brings us to technology. The accumulator is not seeking passive knowledge. They are seeking the efficiency to reach the critical lexical mass required for C1, and they use systems to ensure retention. You frame apps like Anki or Quizlet as mere support tools, a greenhouse for seedlings, and you kind of imply they cheapen the learning process.
Well, they do cheapen it if they are fed shallow information. I mean, without the rich context painstakingly gathered in the journal, the words ecosystem, a spaced repetition system just reduces words back to isolated, binary items. If you just feed Anki a single-word translation pair, you've gained nothing but a passive flicker of recognition. SRS works on recall, but true productive vocabulary requires construction.
That's a compelling argument against misusing SRS, I'll grant you that. But it avoids the potential power of using it systematically. For achieving the necessary breadth quickly, especially when you're dealing with structural knowledge like the word families and roots we just talked about, a powerful SRS is not just a reminder, it is the most systematic and scalable mechanism available. Think about the high-volume nature of affix acquisition. You can't journal Bennett every single day. You need a system that manages the review schedule for hundreds of structural items and derivative words simultaneously, ensuring they are shown to you precisely as you are about to forget them. That is the engine for a high-volume strategy. You're focused on the quality of the individual seed, and that matters for high-frequency words. I get it. But for the C1 learner, they have to efficiently plant an entire field of structural knowledge, and the SRS is the precision tractor needed to manage that scale. The material explicitly suggests leveraging technology wisely. For a systematic learner like Lena, managing hundreds of context-rich phrases, a scalable review system was a necessity, not a luxury.
I agree that SRS is necessary for volume, but the quality input constraint remains. The difference is the starting line. The gardener starts with the deep context of the journal and then ports a context-rich card into the SRS for maintenance. The accumulator, it seems, is content to skip the cognitive labor of context gathering, prioritizing the sheer number of cards reviewed. But without the context, you cannot notice collocations.
I'm not suggesting skipping context. I'm suggesting prioritizing structural accumulation, which by its very nature scales better than individual word journaling. Once the root is known, the derived word, say malicious, is acquired and available for productive use far faster than waiting for it to appear organically 3 times, journaling it, and then testing it. Structural accumulation preemptively builds the lexical landscape.
Which brings us to our final point, right? The nature of productive vocabulary itself. You seem to imply that acquisition must be a slow, organic process of refinement. But the case studies suggest otherwise, particularly when acquisition is driven by immediate, high-stakes need.
Exactly. Look at Kenji the gamer. He wasn't sitting there with a dictionary. He encountered high-stakes, action-oriented chunks, phrases like fan out and search the perimeter. This acquisition was visceral and rapid, driven by immediate need in the personal English greenhouse of his game world. If he failed to acquire the phrase, he lost the game. Simple as that. Or Carlos the doctor. He used a highly targeted specialist plot approach, things like comorbidities and differential diagnosis. He didn't cultivate a massive landscape. He efficiently acquired the 500 specialist words necessary for his job. This evidence strongly suggests that significant, productive vocabulary can be acquired rapidly and functionally when the context is highly specialized or action-oriented. The functional accumulator prioritizes these high-value chunks and accelerates their acquisition because the professional or personal context demands immediate fluency, challenging the whole idea that productive vocabulary must emerge solely from slow cultivation.
I accept the premise that acquisition can be swift and context-driven, especially when stakes are high, but I would clarify that even these specialized and rapid examples still involve the crucial active cultivation step immediately after acquisition. Acquisition is step 1, ownership is step 2. Kenji didn't just read the phrase and move on. The material shows he would quickly ask for clarification. Wait, what does perimeter mean? And then he would immediately use the phrase himself in the next round. This immediate usage, the watering, and actively seeking feedback, the weeding out of errors when he's corrected on collocation or pronunciation. That is the refinement process that transforms the acquired phrase into an owned one, fit for precise communication. The core cognitive labor, whether the initial selection is slow and reflective, like the gardener, or rapid and functional, like the accumulator, is the same. The learner must use the word to construct a sentence or command from scratch. This forces a deep memory search and solidifies the word's position in the productive lexicon. The gardener's approach simply mandates that deep labor before the word is added to the review pile, ensuring the deep root structure is built first, which makes the resulting vocabulary more resilient and available across diverse, non-specialized contexts.
But resilience is facilitated by volume, too. If I know 5,000 words deeply and 10,000 words passively, I am better equipped to navigate new, unknown texts than if I only know 5,000 words deeply. The systematic accumulation of roots and affixes is efficient because it preemptively builds a structural framework for hundreds of words at once, which can then be refined upon first usage. The accumulator argues that structural breadth facilitates future depth. It makes that future organic cultivation easier because the landscape is already somewhat familiar.
I'm just not convinced that structural familiarity can substitute for the active contextual labor needed for productive output, especially in the nuanced literary or philosophical context that C1 demands. Knowing mall doesn't guarantee you'll use malevolent with the correct noun collocation when you're speaking spontaneously. Only the depth of the journal ensures that pairing is available.
But the systematic accumulator would counter that knowing the root allows them to recognize and use the word productively, even if they make small collocation errors initially. They trust the process of feedback and usage, Kenji's weeding, to clean up those errors on the fly. They prioritize the ability to access the word at all over immediate perfect pairing, which is vital when you're trying to reach a vast lexicon rapidly.
And that trade-off, imperfect availability now versus slower, precise ownership later, that, I think, is the heart of our disagreement. It really speaks to the learner's ultimate goals. If the goal is rapid functional application, the accumulator's approach is superior. If the goal is resilient, contextually impeccable output that requires no self-correction, then the gardener must take the lead. This exchange really clarifies how complex true lexical mastery is at the C1 level. I still stand by the idea that vocabulary is a dynamic landscape that requires continuous nurture. And while systematic, scalable, structural tools absolutely exist and are, necessary for volume, the transformation from potential receptive knowledge to true growth, the ability to speak and write with precision and spontaneousness, that happens only through the patient, mindful engagement required by the vocabulary journal, deep context gathering, and the courageous daily practice of usage. This ensures words are spontaneously available for nuanced output.
And I conclude that while patience and mindfulness are certainly virtues, the C1 learner's primary goal of attaining a vast lexicon necessitates that they embrace systematic accumulation methods. Leveraging analytical strategies like roots and affixes, managed efficiently by technology, is required to handle the sheer volume of candidate words generated by heavy immersion. I think the most successful C1 learners, the ones who actually achieve vastness efficiently, likely strike an effective balance, marrying the depth focus of the gardener for core, high-frequency words with the systematic scale of the accumulator for necessary structural breadth.
Indeed. Understanding both the need for deep, resilient roots and the necessity of scalable, high-volume growth deeply informs our understanding of what it means to truly master a language. There is clearly much more to explore in the principles of language ownership.
Absolutely.
Thank you for this insightful discussion.
My pleasure.